One of the hottest topics of discussion here in our country is whether citizens, civilians, should possess weapons of war, should possess military armament. Now, people often argue that civilians, there's no way they could possess military armament, such as Apache helicopter gunships, tanks, thermobaric weapons, bombs, other things like that. And so it's sort of a moot point discussion because civilians can never afford such things that the concept doesn't really make any sense and it shouldn't really be discussed. And there's some truth to that, at least. Civilians do not possess the types of budgets that the military has. They're not spending billions of dollars of their GDP on defense items. But there is another discussion, which is what about the items that civilians can own, that they can possess, they can financially recover from owning, such as AR-15s and small arms. And then people go, well, but the civilian AR-15 doesn't match the might and the prowess of a military M4. And there's this weird idea that the M4 rifle, the rifle of the standard infantryman, is nothing like a civilian AR-15. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about that and actually look at some military-style M4A1 builds and actually compare them to a civilian AR-15 and see if the military M4 is actually that much better than what civilians can buy right now. So this M4 right here has a 14.5 Colt barrel with an A2 flash hider. This is an extended one, but it's more or less the same. I have a carbine length gas system with a front sight post gas block that has a bayonet lug for, when you need to open up pallets of things or charge the enemy. It is also grenade launcher compatible, has a Knights drop-in quad rail, RAS rail. I have a flat top receiver, forged upper receiver and lower receiver, a collapsible buttstock, and then a safe, semi, and full auto trigger group. And that is a military M4A1 build. Over here we have a custom civilian AR-15 with a 14.5 Colt barrel that is grenade launcher capable with a 3-prong flash hider. We have a mid-length gas system on here with a low-pro gas block. We have a free-float M-lock rail, a forged upper and lower receiver, flat-top upper receiver for optics, a collapsible buttstock, safe and semi-auto, and then an aftermarket trigger. As you can see, both of these rifles are pretty much identical. Same barrel length, they're both chambered in 5.56, they can both take grenade launchers, and they can both accept all kinds of optics and lasers and lights. And this is where people go, well, but the military M4 is different in the fact that it's select fire. That makes it automatically special because it's a military weapon. And I find this a particularly amusing argument for why the M4 is better than an AR, because when I've gone and talked to people at different schoolhouses in the military, Marine Corps, Army, whoever it happens to be, or folks in special operations, I've specifically asked them, hey, when do you guys actually use full auto on a rifle like this, on your small arm issued M4A1, Block 2, whatever it happens to be, or like a 416 or something. And the answer I get from all these people is typically, we never do it, we're never training it, or the only scenario in which they bring it up is a react to ambush when they are making an attempt to mag dump into the direction of the ambush to regain fire superiority. And outside of that, they're shooting semi-auto 99% of the time. So full auto for these weapons is more or less a moot point because it is not being utilized. Now, when it comes to a discussion of belt feds, or maybe specific submachine guns, it starts to make a little more sense why you might have full auto for increased capability for those weapons. But for this particular rifle, shooting an intermediate cartridge, rifle cartridge, it doesn't make sense. And so it's not really part of the discussion, especially when people shooting these rifles are shooting semi-auto 99% of the time, which means these guns are practically identical to a civilian AR-15. One of the biggest performance differences of the military-issued M4A1 compared to civilian AR-15s is the accuracy, or lack thereof. The military has a standard for the M4A1 that needs to achieve a 4 MOA group at 100 meters. What this means is when you drop prone and you shoot your 5-round group, your 10-round group, whatever, those rounds had better be within a 4-inch circle. That's just the accuracy of the barrel with the ammunition and everything that's going on there. Now, a lot of the guns, they're going to fluctuate inside of that. It might be 1.5 MOA, 2 MOA, 3 MOA, whatever it happens to be. But after you've shot these rifles for tens of thousands of rounds and they've circulated around within the organization and they're not getting replaced, they're not getting new barrels, that 4 MOA group starts to get a little bit larger. So there's a lot of issued guns right now that are not that accurate in the grand scheme of things, but you have civilian AR-15s on the market that you could purchase that have a 1 MOA guarantee. Now, generally it's a 1 MOA guarantee with really good ammunition or a specific type of ammunition, but generally what that will mean, if it has that 1 MOA guarantee, it'll be like a 2 or maybe a 3 MOA gun with training ammo. And a lot of the rifles that we have in the armory, we've gone out and we've shot them and it's 1.5 MOA, 2 MOA, and you know what? That's pretty good. That's often much better than military issue rifles. So that's a huge performance difference between a military issue M4 and the rifles that you guys can buy online right now and have shipped to your FFL. That is the biggest performance difference, but when you look at an M4A1, a lot of you guys, or a lot of you who have shot guns before, are going to look at it and go, the ergonomics don't look that great. And you're not wrong. You've got a shorty handguard, so you can't get your hand further out to control the rifles. You're transitioning through targets. The butt stock, a waffle butt stock, a lot of people don't really like them. There are definitely stocks out there that are a little bit better. The hard plastic butt pad, depending on your equipment, depending on your kit, can slip around. I like having a little bit of a rubber butt pad that just helps really keep everything locked into place, which does make a big difference when it comes to recoil management and consistency. With that said, though, you can shoot a waffle stock very well, so don't think you can't shoot if you have a waffle stock. It just means you suck. You actually need to just get good at shooting and lock that stock into place. The A2 angle grip, again, not necessarily the end of the world. I have found that reducing the angle of the grip in a lot of shooters allows the hand to have a little bit less tension, so you can actually work the trigger a little bit faster. This is particularly important if you are shooting a mil-spec trigger or a heavy trigger. If you're running a full auto trigger pack, or a mil-spec trigger, you're looking at a 5.5, 6 pound trigger. So when you have the tension of your grip combined with this heavy trigger, you're not always able to shoot these rifles really fast on semi-auto, although you can obviously with training. It does make things a little bit easier to reduce the angle of that grip, and then obviously if you can swap out that trigger to a something a little bit more optimized. If you are running a full auto gun, though, you might have to get something like the Geisley Super Select Fire Trigger, and those are extremely expensive, and your organization will probably not issue those because of that. Another factor to consider is the Knight's rail. This is not a free float rail. This is a drop-in quad rail that gives you the ability to mount all kinds of accessories, but because it's not a free float rail, what that means is when you go to throw this rail onto a barricade, you're shooting from a barricaded position, you're starting to really flex on the rail, pulling it really tight to the body. That will actually affect the accuracy of the barrel. It's actually putting that input into the barrel itself, and that can cause inaccuracy. So your 4 MOA gun now may be a 5 MOA gun of just an uncontrollable group that you are not going to be able to control based on your own proficiency. This also means if you're mounting your IR lasers to the front, which pretty much everybody is, as that rail is wobbling and flexing around, that is also going to affect the zero of your IR laser. So that's just, again, it's going to increase the variables. That's going to make it harder for you to take accurate shots. Most guys, though, if you're running this, at close range, CQB, or inside of 20 meters, is that rail flex going to matter with this D-ball on top? No, it's not. You'll still be able to get man-sized, body-sized shots, not really a big deal. But when it comes to shooting 100 plus meters, all those little factors do all combine, and that just makes it a lot harder to get accurate shots on target. As far as ergonomics go, like I mentioned earlier, it is a short, stubby rail, so you are going to be a little bit more choked up when it comes to actually shooting it. But again, with training, you can get by fairly easily. You don't have to have a really long rail to control the gun. You don't have to have that, but it does make things a little bit more tricky, a little bit more difficult. But it's not too bad, thankfully. So looking at a civilian AR-15, this is a 14.5 pinned custom rifle with a Daniel Defense Risk 3 rail. This is a non-NFA weapon. Most people in like something like 45 states, 46 states can own this rifle right here. And I would argue that this rifle is 100%, well, maybe not 100%, but it is absolutely superior to most issued M4s on the market. I have a free float rail, so when I go to shoot this on barricades and when I'm adding all sorts of input into the rail, pulling tight into my body, I am not affecting the harmonics of the barrel. I'm not going to be adding additional variables that make it hard for me to shoot at distance. This is a more accurized barrel, and I can actually swap it out as often as I need to based on my shooting schedule and what I'm doing. I can mount my accessories wherever I want. I don't always have to mount my PEC on the side, on top, or my weapon light on one side or another. And I can swap out gear as often as I want to, or as often as I need to. If I want to try out a Surefire, I try out a Surefire. I start with a Streamlight, I use the Streamlight, then later I get the Surefire. I can literally do whatever I want, and a lot of these military guns aren't even issued with weapon lights. Because, you know, they focus so much on night vision, why would you want a weapon light on your rifle? But in this case, I can have whatever I want. If I go to mount an ACOG, well, I can place it wherever I want. I can put it all the way in the rear of the receiver, which is where it should go, so that I can have adequate length of pull and still be able to get a good sight picture with the ACOG. And that's usually people's complaint with the ACOG is the eye relief, and that's from running a military issue M4 with all of the armorer's requirements. I can also change out the trigger. So even though I can't have a full auto gun because of unconstitutional laws, I can have a far superior trigger in semi-auto, which is what I'm going to be shooting 99% of the time anyway. In this case, I have a Geisley SDC in this gun. I could also run an ALG, something a little bit less expensive, but allows me to shoot the gun a little bit faster, have a crisper trigger break, which makes engaging at distance a whole lot easier. So right there, if I'm shooting semi-auto 99% of the time with this gun, and I've got an infantry guy shooting, you know, semi-auto 99% of the time with this gun, I'll have a better time 99% of the time shooting my semi-auto optimized aftermarket trigger than his crappy mil-spec full auto trigger group. I can also change out my furniture. I can change out my stock to whatever I want, whenever I want. I can use whatever grip I want, whenever I want. I can swap around from a BCM to a Magpul to new grip comes out from some Instagram company and I want to try that out because it looks interesting, and then I get rid of it because it sucks because it's from Instagram, and I put my BCM back on. So again, this is one of the benefits to being a civilian purchaser, being a citizen, is I can choose and build my M4, my infantry M4, AR, whatever you want to call it, to my specifications however I want. Yes, I will have to fund that rifle myself, but I don't have to buy everything all at once. This is a common misconception that people have. And it's probably because of the social media age. They look at social media, they look at a YouTube video like this, and they see that I have this chatted out rifle that's completely built, ready to go, and they think they have to have the same thing. Well, that's not true at all. You start with the rifle, it might have iron sights. You add a weapon light, you add the sling, later on you add the optic, later on you upgrade the optic, later on maybe you get an IR laser, and then later on maybe you get night vision. You don't have to buy everything all at once, and I don't even necessarily recommend that. Buy as you go, upgrade as you go, and there's the really cool thing about the civilian market in particular is it's much more competitive than the military market when it comes to contract guns. So there are now budget rifles on the market, sub $1,000, that are starting to be pretty competitive to some of the higher end, you know, mid-price or even high-tier guns that you could start buying for under $1,000 and then upgrade as you go, like I said before, and still have a rifle that is far more superior than a military M4A1. I'm going to predict that there are already comments that are ongoing about our particular M4A1 clones, builds, are not actually correct to, you know, so-and-so in the comments saying that they never had that equipment, they never had those accessories, they were never allowed to set up their M4 that way, and that these guns are not actually M4A1s, they're not correct. And that's partially true. I mean, these aren't all government lowers with, you know, the little barcode and that are all full auto. But what I did before filming this video is I put out a message on my Instagram asking currently active conventional military guys to send me photos of their M4 builds. I wasn't looking for, you know, 2010 rifles, you know, early GWAT. I wanted current military issue M4s, how they're set up, because there are far more guys running guns that look like this than the URGI Special Forces type guns that you often find on Instagram and on YouTube videos of civilians cloning those out and trying to build them out because those are cool and interesting. So I got about 100 photos from different guys, primarily in the Army, who submitted photos of their different builds, and the SOPs are all over the place. And that's why these 4 different guns, and I got another one, 5 different M4s, are all a little bit different. They'll have their little nuances, they'll have their little modifications and their changes because guys ask questions. They know the armorers or the SOPs in that particular organization allow them to modernize as much as possible their M4 rifles. So I just want to go over these real quick. So this is obviously the most sort of common build that I was sent photos of, generally without a weapon light, because guys generally aren't issued weapon lights. I find that really interesting, but it's just the way things are. With an M68 aim point, a PEC 15 on the front, Knights Rail FSP, just like this, the way it sits. But then there are other guys who flex their M4s into the modern age as much as possible. And there's a lot of guys running this Ergo quad rail extension that bolts on to your FSP and gives you some Picatinny section to, get your hand a little bit further out if that's what you're into, move your weapon light further out, have your switches for your laser and your light and all your other stuff. And so I've been running these a little bit. They get hot very fast, by the way. I don't think they will retain 0 for your laser, so I don't necessarily recommend you put your laser on the front of one of these. But if you have, as a civilian or as a military guy, if you have a Colt FSP rifle or an FSP rifle from another company and you want to sort of modernize it a little bit, you can pick up one of these and get it a little bit longer and kind of make it look like a Block 2, FSP SOCOM gun, if that's what you want to do. Some guys have ACOGs with RMRs, traditional TA-31s with the RMR in the back. That definitely works. And then I saw some guys, interestingly enough, running Ready Mags. They weren't super common, but they do exist. They are out there, which gives guys the ability to run an extra magazine on the side so they can have 60 rounds on board at all times. Adds weight, obviously, but that's kind of nifty and that's kind of cool. This is actually a rifle from one of the guys at work, a former MARSOC guy. This was one of his builds. He tried to modernize his M4 as much as possible. He had the TA-31 ACOG, changed out the stock, moved his laser to the side, and then ran a Surefire on the left side and a Magpul AFG to kind of punch out as far as possible, get that underneath the FSP, which also helps with heat mitigation, preventing you from getting too hot. And so that definitely works right there. So those are just a few of the builds out there. I've have some other ones that are a little bit modified. The other sort of build that you guys are obviously probably very familiar with, going back to early GWAT, 2010s era, are M4s with a M203 mounted underneath. Now this is an interesting sort of a setup because civilians can own M203 grenade launchers, believe it or not. You have to pay an unconstitutional $200 destructive devices tax stamp, but if you want to slap an M203 on the bottom of your rifle, they can be purchased, they can be bought. Now the munitions, that's a little bit of a different story. Those are a little bit tricky to get, but this is obviously another type of build that I got a few photos of, but most guys are running the new HK M320 as a standalone, and I saw some guys mounting them to the bottom of their M4s as well. But at the end of the day, all of these rifles are more or less the same. They're all chambered in 5.56. They're all 14.5 barrel length. They have their own nuance with their different optics or different lights, but more or less these are all the same and possess the same capability. They all have IR lasers for night vision application. They all shoot the same bullet, and they are all AR-15s, which I know that's going to trigger some folks, but just a little bit of history for you guys. The AR-15 came after the AR-10. Essentially, the AR-10 was the first Armalite rifle that was designed, and the AR-15 came right after. And then the military went, hey, that AR-15 rifle is pretty cool. We're going to designate that the M16, because the military loves adding their own designations to things. And the M16, obviously was made and went to war. And then after that, they came out with the M4, making the rifle a little bit more compact. But originally, it all stemmed from an AR-15. So when you hear people get all triggered online about, well, civilians don't have M4s, they have AR-15s, they are partially correct. We do not have military designation rifles because we don't have military property, except for some of these PEC 15s. But we don't have military property necessarily, but ultimately these are all the same. They're the same rifle, they were based off of the same design, and they're gonna have different furniture and different accessories on them, but they're all AR-15s. The military has absolutely issued an AR-15 type rifle. just happens to be called an M4A1 or an M16A4 or whatever the designation is. And this gets even more kind of complicated and weird when you start looking at units who get uppers from other companies, like BCM uppers or Surge uppers, the SURG uppers, to then put on their M4A1 lowers. Is that now an M4 anymore? Not really. It's a sort of a weird, abomination, MCX, suppressed upper on top of an M4A1 lower. And so that's why a lot of these sort of conversations going on, they're kind of pointless and kind of meaningless, because ultimately these are all AR15 M4 carbine type rifles, chambered in 5.56, and they're all relatively the same. But at the end of the day, the AR15 that is currently purchasable by civilians is most often, usually, superior to the M4 rifle that is commonly issued out to the military as a whole. But even with that taken into consideration, does it really matter what rifle you have? Well, it doesn't matter if you suck. So at the end of the day, training is the thing that's going to make the biggest difference. Whether you are an infantry guy who's issued an M4 that looks pretty plain Jane, or whether you are a civilian with unlimited money somehow and you have a Knight's Armament rifle that's just chatted out of its mind. If you suck at shooting, it really doesn't matter which rifle you end up having. Training is the thing that makes the biggest difference. And I've been shooting these types of rifles now for a very long time. I've been shooting my Gucci MCXs and other ARs, and at the end of the day, when I bring a rifle out here, it really comes down to my skill level using that weapon, not exactly what stock is on the gun, exactly what gas system, what buffer, what spring, all of that. That can make little differences here and there, but ultimately in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. What matters is your ability to actually shoot. But the other thing to think about, the greatest injustice of all, of everything represented here, is the fact that civilians can't own select fire weapons. That is the #1 difference to an M4A1 that is issued to the government, issued to the military, compared to what civilians can possess right now. And as we talked about earlier, it really doesn't make that much of a difference. Most guys aren't even using it. But for some reason, us peasants are not allowed to possess a gun that shoots a little bit faster than if we have a Geisley SD3G trigger, which is actually about as fast as shooting full auto. So that's a conversation that should be had at another point, another time of day, and some regulation that we need to be working on, because at the end of the day, it's just a gun that shoots faster. It's just spicy splits. It's not more evil. It's not even necessarily more lethal. I would argue full auto in a rifle such as this, in a small arms type rifle, actually makes the weapon less lethal and less capable, which is why everyone is shooting semi-auto. So with that said, guys, get out there and train. Make sure you are spending more time shooting than you are on forums, more time shooting than you are on Instagram commenting, criticizing how everyone else is getting out there and putting in work, and use whatever rifle you have, your issued M4A1, your civilian purchased AR-15, your weird debut rifle because you're interested in old esoteric rifles. Make sure you're out there training to the best of your ability so that you can be the greatest asset to this country.